People of France, what in the world are you allowing to happen to your country? Let me even make the question more broader than that. Western man, what in the world are you allowing to happen to your civilization? As you just saw, there is no doubt that France is burning. It is a power keg. It is on fire. Monuments are on fire. Entire neighborhoods and cities look like war zones. There's trash strewn around. There's cars exploding. There's fires blazing everywhere. There's people firing guns up in the air. There's police officers. A police chief in France actually said that these are not riots what has happened in France over the past few days of the posting of this video. This is in fact a war. And when you have a domestic police chief using terminology normally used to describe an attack from a foreign adversary, you must ask yourself, what is going on? Now, when I first heard about what's happening in France, I immediately reminisced to the George Floyd Summer of Love, as it was called by the propagandist media, protests that ravaged America, which is the nation that I live in the summer of 2020. I immediately thought of that. I saw Minneapolis burning. I saw black businesses being destroyed in the name of destroying the oppressive system of capitalism that supposedly has caused black people to be oppressed. I saw people destroy and burn down their own communities around the nation. And so I immediately thought, this is what's happening. But then I was quickly disabused of that thought, because now I understand that what happened with George Floyd, while it was a similar expression of passion and rage that came from an ideologically unsound place, it was not the result of, let's say, the actions of politicians throughout the years who have endorsed an ideology that ultimately led to it. It was, in fact, a result of decades of indoctrination in non-governmental institutions like universities and public schools into wokeness that eventually led a lot of young people to burn down these cities in the name of justice. And then that same culture of wokeness enabled politicians to justify it in the name of justice. Whenever someone tries to justify evil in the name of justice, you ought to call them out and scorn them for the swindler they are. They are a swindler, they are a trickster. But what's happening in France, I would even say, is perhaps most aptly described by using wartime terminology. Because I'll put it very simply, what's happening in France is an invasion. Well, this is going to get me in trouble. What's happening in France is an invasion. Let me say it one more time for anyone in the back who may be shocked right now. What's happening in France is an invasion. But instead of it being a typical, traditional invasion, like the barbarians being at the gate of Rome and coming in through force and destroying things through chaos and outward hostility, this is an invasion that has been co-sponsored, supported, and enabled through policies in Europe and also in France that justify this invasion in the name of multiculturalism, in the name of being diverse, in the name of being loving, in the name of being benevolent. This is an invasion that the politicians of France and the bureaucrats of Europe that sit in the EU, that sit in the halls of European power, which try to enshrine globalism in their nations, have co-sponsored, have sanctioned, and have pushed onto their people. That's what's actually going on here in France. There's 2 points I want to make here, because this is what's really not being talked about too much when it comes to these French riots. There's 2 primary drivers of these French riots. Number one, we must look at Macron, who is the president of France, and his attitude towards governing the country, because his philosophy has a lot to do with why France is how it is. Then we must look at multiculturalism, the phenomenon of multiculturalism, which has also had a big thing to do with how France is how it is. Macron came into office by saying he is the leader of a humanist project. In fact, when he actually came into office and he beat Le Pen, Macron literally said that we stand for humanism, we stand for enlightenment, and Le Pen, who is a French politician who was more skeptical of immigration, he said, you stand for darkness. You are bad. You are evil. You don't like enlightenment. And one of Le Pen's defining policies is that she wants France to remain France. Not necessarily racially, but instead culturally, right? You can be an Arab person and also be France. French occupied Algeria for a very long time. You can be an Arab person and be French. This is not a racial proposition that Le Pen's putting forward. It's a cultural one. And the cultural one is, regardless of what shade of skin you are, you have to assimilate to the culture. This is Marine Le Pen's main point. And Macron called this evil and anti-humanist. And so Macron's emphasis on this humanist ethos, the idea of being this generous benefactor of all of humanity, oftentimes through expropriation, oftentimes called welfare as a euphemism, taking from some people to give to others, that's humanism for Macron. But this humanist proposition has bled in to how Macron handles the issue of immigration. And I argue that it has actually stifled his ability to handle the issue of immigration in a sound way, and instead it has been the antecedent to a lot of what we're seeing in France right now. So, for example, Macron's government has said numerous times that the most humanitarian, the most humanist path to dealing with France's migration crisis is by making the system more efficient so more people can come in. Now, Macron's immigration policy has actually been quite schizophrenic. Because in one sense, he is hardline, anti-immigrant when it comes to people who he does not believe have any right to be in France. But on the other hand, he's this open humanist, this globalist, who wants as many people to come in if he can help them. And his policies have kind of also reflected this very, very odd mentality. And so of his writings. So, for example, Macron in 2017 actually praised Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, who let in over 1 million migrants from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And he said that Merkel's decision to let people in who did not assimilate to her culture and caused a lot of problems in Germany saved the collective dignity of the European people. And he also said that he would not tolerate the rebuilding of walls in Europe. And he criticized the abject simplifications made by those who say that by opening the borders to migrants, the Chancellor exposed Europe to severe dangers. In other words, as Macron was getting into office, he defended mass migration. He opened up the door for the invasion. Then, a few months after that, Macron actually said that there were 800,000 immigrants coming from Libya to Europe, and he wanted to vet them by having immigration centers in Libya. But he also then said that the idea is to create hotspots to avoid people taking crazy risks. He wanted to offset the potential issues. So he wanted to, at one hand, he was saying, yes, let's open up to everybody, but then he was cautious. His policy was schizophrenic. It made no sense. This is the problem of centrism. Being a fence-sitter, being a centrist makes no sense. Because moral convictions are not a matter of compromise. They are a matter of understanding, of sound reasoning, and of being willing to stand on conviction and say this is right and that is wrong. And some may say, Christian, this seems black and white. Well, guess what? Sometimes what is true and what is false is quite simple. And instead of letting some cultural idea of conviction being a bad thing because you're not being open to different perspectives, you should instead allow conviction to influence your ability to understand other perspectives while also understanding that you are grounded on the bedrock of truth, and that does not change. Truth is not a matter of compromise, people. Which is why one of these centrists made me go crazy. But then Macron said in a speech, he pledged free housing for all newcomers, everywhere in France, he said. And he said, by the end of this year, I do not want to have any men or women living on the streets or in the wood. I want emergency accommodations everywhere. So Macron, on one hand, was saying, I don't want this. The other hand, he was saying, I want this. Again, he opened up the doors for the invasion. One of the biggest policy blunders that actually infected this in France was the signing of the Sandhurst Treaty. The Sandhurst Treaty basically reduced processing time for migrants hoping to travel to Britain from northern France from 6 months to 1 month for adults and 25 days for children. And after this, France saw a massive influx of migrants from Britain into their territory. Now, why does this matter? Because the northern part of France, and also Paris as well, all these parts of France are actually besieged by regular turf wars. You heard that right. Gangs of African and Kurdish groups of migrants actually go on the streets, fight, shoot, kill. Some of them fight, shoot, and kill to establish control over human trafficking in France, while others just fight, shoot, and kill because they have sectarian differences. And this is the reality for people in France. Also, in the past, Paris has actually been the site of massive migrant camps that have made the residents of Paris actually quite angry. In fact, there's one camp that was called the Jungle, which the French had to take down because it was becoming a honeypot for so much degeneracy and decadence that was really tearing down their nation. In 2017, Paris residents were mad that hundreds of migrants were sleeping in their neighborhood, and they threatened to launch a hunger strike until the French would remove these people from their neighborhoods. So what do you have? You have people coming in that are not assimilating, that are literally being led in by this centrist government that is so milquetoast, that come in under this humanist ideal, and Macron does nothing substantive. In fact, when these protests began, Macron was videotaped dancing to Elton John at a concert while his country burnt. So much for the humanist project. Centralization, my friends, is no way to inspire actual change in a society. Human relationships, by their very nature, actually are not centralized. Human relationships are decentralized modes of being and acting that are established by the principle of voluntary interaction and mutual interest, and then work their way up from that single premise to affecting the rest of society. Imagine society as a network of interlocking individual interactions, which cannot be measured as one single mass, one single organism, but can only be measured as individual interactions taking place in particular areas. That's what society is. But the moment you say you can reign from on high and fix things from on high is the moment you go against the nature of human society and human behavior, and also is the moment where you set yourself up for inevitable failure. You cannot centrally plan the destiny of a nation. The communist countries tried this. The other countries tried this as well that were not communist. A lot of fascist countries tried this. Authoritarian collectivist regimes have tried to do this time and time again, and they fail because it goes against the spirit of human interaction. It goes against first principles. Macron has no understanding of first principles, which is why this crisis is happening. Now, we can't talk about the centralized sanctioning of this crisis without also talking about Islam. Here's the simple fact. There are many sects, there are about 5 or so sects of Islam. Not all of them are made equal. But the Sunni sects of Islam, which happen to be the majority of migrants in France who believe in Sunni Islam, is there's a particularly violent strain of people in that sect that believe in jihad, that believe in holy war, that believe in imposing their vision upon the rest of society through Sharia, that believe in using coercion as a means of inducing society to be the way they want it to be. And we see this violent sect normalized in so many Middle Eastern countries through laws where you can cut off the hands of gay people, where you can restrict women from doing certain things. We know what this is like. And there are even certain areas of the UK that are no-go zones that is dominated by this particular strain of Islam. Now, how in the world did Macron, has he dealt with this issue? Very simply, he hasn't. Instead, he has relied on a mechanism established in France to deal with this issue called the French Council of Muslim Faith. It's existed for a very long time. And this is basically the French government attempt to centralize Islam, fund Islam, and control the flow of discussion and behavior of Islam. But the problem is, as I just mentioned, you can't centrally plan a society, and you sure as hell can't centrally plan a 1,000 plus year old religion that has existed and has done things well before the government was even around in the current form. You can't do that. But Macron has rested upon lazy centralization of power, resources, and planning. Not to fix, but to engineer the kind of society he wants. And the fact that the French Council of Muslim Faith has failed to correct the radicalism and the extremism of particular Muslims in France, the fact that it's failed to correct the gang turf wars that happen in open French streets and also involve attacking innocent people who get caught up in the mist, the fact that the Inter-Muslim Council has not solved the human trafficking problem that also happens from gangs of majority Muslims, the fact it's useless. It's a placebo. It's totally useless. And it's an attempt to fix an issue in a way that fixes the issue in no way. This brings us to the issue of multiculturalism. Any French analyst who is being honest with himself will have to tell you that France's biggest problem is not that there are Muslims, but that there are Muslims that have not assimilated. People who refuse to assimilate to French culture. Now, the French take assimilation quite seriously. If you want to even change the French language, you have to pass a law. The French language is governed by the government, by an institution of French society. The French take national identity quite seriously. In fact, Macron took it quite seriously, so much so that he said the woke ideas from America should not come to France, which is interesting. Again, Macron is willing to defend France from the barbarians at the gate, but he's not willing to defend France from the humanist-induced sickness that he has let into his country, that has ravaged his country, because it goes against his ideals. Never allow your premises, the premises of your beliefs, to restrain you from the truth. If the premises of your belief blind you from the truth, get rid of your beliefs. The truth is higher than your opinions. Truth is higher than opinion. In fact, opinion is evidence that the truth is not quite yet seen. Just a little lesson there. So Macron's willing to take on wokeness, but he won't take on the barbarians at the gate in any substantial way, other than relying on centralization. Macron's philosophy is actually deeply anti-human. Remember, Macron had no problem making people who did not take the COVID vaccine into second-class citizens. Macron had no problem demoralizing and delegitimizing people who made their own personal medical decisions. And that same mentality of centralization and force over cooperation and voluntary association has overtaken his behavior here. Now, multiculturalism is this idea that has informed a lot of European immigration policy, because it essentially says a few things. Number one, all society is one big power exchange between two groups, the dominant culture and the minority culture. The dominant culture is held to be oppressive. The dominant culture is held to be bad and ignorant. And the dominant culture is immediately, in the eyes of the multiculturalist, deranked towards everyone who believes in this idea. The minority culture, no matter what that culture is, by fact of them being a numerical minority, they are seen as benevolent. They are seen as the necessary benefactors of societal concern. This belief goes on further to say that you cannot judge the minority culture because cultural relativism protects them. Everyone has different ways of doing things, and all ways are valid, all ways are good, all ways are accepted. When this mentality enters a nation, the ideals that nation is built upon, if the nation does not affirm this cultural relative ideas, and by virtue of them being nations, no nation can exist while affirming a cultural relative idea. It's paradoxical. It can't happen. Any nation that lets this in will deal with a problem of assimilation. And right now, a majority of migrants in France have not assimilated. And therefore, they have brought their norms and their behaviors into France. And they have no problem exerting them upon the French people by use of guns, by use of Molotov cocktails, by use of threats and intimidation, by going ahead and trying to injure a mayor's wife. That's one of the reasons why the police chief said it's war, because the mayor, one of the mayors in town, of the towns in France, his wife got injured and his residents got attacked by migrants. They have no problem doing this because in their culture, it's all about achieving their fundamental aim of establishing their beliefs in the society, the jihad, the holy war. Again, this is not all Muslims, but this is a virulent strain of Muslims that is quite voluminous in the French population who have refused to assimilate and who fight, do turf wars out in the open in which innocent French people get caught up in. This is a problem of assimilation, and if you don't assimilate, the nation falls apart, because all nations by their existence, by their very nature, need cohesion. They need cooperation. Remember I said cooperation was the fundamental principle of society? Without cooperation, society falls apart. But multiculturalism does not promote cooperation. It promotes conflict and division, needless division. Man is refined by division. Division actually helps us understand everything. If the world was not divided into categories, we would be ignorant of everything. But needless division that results in physical violence and hatred and enmity towards your fellow man, that tears a society apart. That tears a nation asunder. And multiculturalism seeds the cultural grounds with resentment, and then through that resentment creates this oppressor-oppressed conflict, majority-minority dialectic, and through that dialectic then produces violent behavior that results in disunity and disharmony within the nation. But multiculturalism, because has this emphasis on being loving and accepting and having this blind affection towards the world, is then therefore consumed and trounced by the world when it takes it up on its foul fruit. Multiculturalism bears no fresh fruit, it bears foul fruit, and that foul fruit results in the destruction or in the destabilization of societies. That's what's going on in France. Some commenters want to simply say it's about anti-whiteism. And I'll say this, the growing racism towards white folks in the West has been sanctioned and supported and forwarded by institutions and governments. When you have in America our government doing diversity trainings and teaching principles like anti-racism is the best way to do things as opposed to having an individualistic viewpoint, then yes, you have a government that is preaching racism towards one group to bolster a narrative. But that's not merely what's going on here. The bigger idea is this idea of blind humanism, which cannot measure affection well and gives it to everybody, and then enforces that through policy. It has no limits. Multiculturalism has no limits as it relates to the groups that it claims are oppressed and overtaken by the broader society. Those groups have impunity to do whatever they want to do. But guess what? Values are not relative. Values are objective phenomena, which we can measure by first principles and by empirical observation, what their impacts are in reality. And by those two measurements, first principles and also their impacts paired together, we can decide if values are beneficial to a moral person or a moral society, or if they are not. If a culture values the subjugation of women by having them cover up every single part of their body unless their eyes are showing, and then restricting them from driving, we can safely say, under the framework of natural law, which has been attested to throughout generations, thousands of years, and is also objectively provable, that society is backward, primitive, and it's wrong. If a society values the extermination of the unborn, then we can also say a society has gone corrupt. It's wrong. If a society values killing your religious enemies because they don't conform to your beliefs, and if a society values forcing your beliefs upon other people by force, we can also say that society has gone wrong. If society values materialism and class conflict and the welfare state more than they do the spiritual potential of every man to overcome his own limitations and to inspire for greater heights, that society has something wrong. If we can't call what is wrong, wrong, then we cannot correct against abuse. We cannot correct against falsehood. And what do you call a society that cannot correct against falsehood? A society lumbering towards its own death. Life is all about correction. Life is all about limitation. Life is all about understanding the limits of your actions and your behaviors and how they impact people. And the principle of justice, far from being this abstract social category, which applies to groups and not individuals, is a principle that binds together individual relationships and provides a guiding moral compass for them to be officiated in ways that are both benevolent and proper. Without a proper sense of justice, you don't have a proper society. You have a bunch of tribes warring against each other and trying to destroy each other with as much ferocity as they can. And that's what's happening in France, people. And that's what's going to continue to happen in the West, because these protests have expanded beyond France. Now there's rioting in Switzerland. This is going to keep happening until we in the West say there are objective values, and we cannot continue to co-sign the destruction of those universal principles in the name of benevolence. We have to understand what it means to be certain things. We need a revolution of the mind, people. We need to be able to courageously stand up, check our assumptions about particular ideas and particular concepts, and not allow particular things that make us feel good, like being benevolent or being kind or accepting, govern how we actually deal with things in reality. We cannot allow our passions to trump our behavior, because if man does that, he is little better than an insect that lays upon the floor of the forest and sucks from the earth. We are more than that. We are creatures of higher potential, of reason. We have built civilization with our fingers and our minds, combining our creative energies with our actions. And from that, we birthed the West. We birthed so many different things, but that can go away very easily if we don't acknowledge the point we are at, if we get away from philosophy, if we get away from sound reasoning. All of that can go away. The people of France and the West, here is the end of my message for you. What way do you choose? What path do you choose? There are already French nationals standing up, marching with their mayors, fighting back against this invasion. And thank God for you. God bless all of you. Keep marching, my friends. But for everyone else, what do you choose? Do you choose a society where destruction, chaos, and disrespect are normalized under the guise of acceptance and benevolence? Or do you choose a society where you get to maintain your cultural and national identity in the way you wish to maintain it, and you let other people come in who are willing to respect those norms and values, and therefore allow the society to be copacetic? Which way do you choose? Because right now, I'm not seeing the second option being chosen very much at all. I'm seeing the first option being chosen. And that terrifies me. It terrifies me not only for France, but for the rest of Western civilization. We must all stand up and fight against this menace. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, go to my Patreon, my locals. If you want to support me, please support me financially. That's the biggest way you can help me out. Go to my locals, christianwatson.locals.com. Go to my Patreon, which is all in the comment section down below. Join my Discord, too. If you want to talk to me and have conversations about these issues, join my Discord. That's very important as well. My friends, I know this was long of videos. Thank you so much for hanging along with me. I love it so much. I appreciate you so much. But I want you all to remain thoughtful, remain inspired, remain hopeful, and most importantly, my friends, please remain pensive. Bye, all.